Well, after all these years of trying not to like the new Österreich-Ring, and that's because, of course, I was around when we used to race at the old Österreich-Ring and Zeltweg Light was never the same. I've got to say now that from a technical perspective, I'm actually beginning to fall in love with this new circuit for one reason, and that is that bit of road I've been talking about, certainly in the last video and in the live stream in the build-up to Austria. That transition from turn 7, which is the end of that long left-hander in the midfield, into turn 8, which is the right-hander leading on to a medium length straight downhill into the last two corners. It's a really impressive bit of road. It's 6th, 7th gear. It's very quick, in other words, and there's a lot of load on the car and a lot of focus on weight change from left to right, loading that up at exactly the right rate, commensurate, of course, with the pace the car's going and what the tyres are going through at any given millisecond through there. All a bit of a mouthful, but in totality, it adds up to a piece of road that is very, very discerning of touch and feel of drivers like Max, and I'm sure everybody has their own idea of who can be there in the turbulence of Max Verstappen these days. And on that basis, it was really interesting to see in qualifying today how much advantage Max was gaining in Sector 3, and primarily through exactly that section of road, exactly the bit of road I've been talking about, left to right, high speed. And in qualifying today for the Grand Prix tomorrow in the afternoon, we had the sprint race in the morning, we'll get onto that in a minute. It was fascinating to see how much advantage Max was able to pull out through precisely that piece of road. Yes, he was very good too, very precise and very accurate through those last two right-handers, but he'd kind of done the job by then because of the speed he was carrying out of turn 8 into that little bit of straightaway, and that's what did it. And that's what moved Lewis Hamilton when he was coming back on his slowdown lap back into the pit lane, when he asked his engineer about where he was, and they thought he was 6th at the time, and then Oscar Piastri had his time deleted, which moved Lewis up to 5th. And then on hearing that he was half a second away, he just sort of went, wow, half a second on a circuit lap as short as this, wow. And of course, like everybody else in Formula One, he's just then thinking of, I say most people in Formula One, let's put it that way, he's then thinking of the car. How can that Red Bull be so much quicker than a Mercedes around such a short lap? Particularly if, when you look at the top speeds, there's very little in it. There's not much you can do in Austria, given the amount of downforce you got to run, to enhance your top speed. Yes, Max was quickest by a little bit. We'll get onto those numbers in a second as well, but not by much. We're not talking 3, 4, 5 kilometers an hour here, or even more than that, or straights as long as some of the other circuits we see. We're seeing a very compact circuit with very little difference in top speed. Quite a lot of the corners are kind of line locked. You've got to do what the corner asks you to do. But on that one bit of road, also into turn 1 as well, I've got to give Max credit there. It's a very, very good corner for Max, that entry into turn 1. But on that very, very precise piece of road, turns 7 to 8, that delicate piece of road, Max Verstappen was just outstanding there today. So in order to see what he's actually doing there, let's have a look at some of the data in some sort of logical order, beginning with the overall qualifying laps and how they're lining up on the grid tomorrow. Max didn't run any new soft tyres in Q1, unlike anybody else of his nearest opposition. So he had fully loaded 2 sets for Q2 and Q3, and he used them superbly. His fastest lap was his last lap, which was a 4.314, as you can see there. Lando Norris will start second, so there's a big difference there already, 4 tenths. And then it's very, very close, obviously. George Russell, very good job again in the Mercedes. Carlos Sainz upholding Ferrari after Charles Leclerc went off into the second last right-hander on his last attempt on a new set of Pirellis, of course, but he was really short of new tyres and was running a scrub set in the first run in Q3, which is possibly why he was trying so hard on that new set on the last run. Nonetheless, at that level, shouldn't be making that sort of mistake. Lewis Hamilton went at 4.9, just a shade away from George Russell. Charles Leclerc, that's the lap he did on the scrub tyres. Oscar Piastri, that's the first lap he did in Q3. He did a 4.7, that was the lap, was the deleted. It was a shade slower than Lando, so he would have been starting P3, now starting P7. Sergio Perez, droning around 5.2. Nico Hülkenberg, this morning it was Kevin Magnussen doing a really good job in the sprint race for Haas Ferrari. This afternoon it was Nico Hülkenberg, nothing like having 2 drivers you can rely on. And Esteban Ocon got his Alpine into the Q3 top 10 as well. Just having a look at those who were eliminated. No real surprises in Q1. I suppose you could say Lance Stroll, a bit of a surprise. Q2, Fernando Alonso, underlining again how uncompetitive the Aston Martins are at the moment. Kevin Magnussen not having a great run in Q2, and Pierre Gasly just being pipped by Esteban Ocon around here in Austria. And now just to dispel the talk about top speed, obviously Red Bull have got a really good compromise in terms of the amount of downforce they've got, the amount of grip they've got, and the top speed they have. 319 max on his quickest lap through the speed trap, which is at the end of that long back straight. You can see on the horizon, George Russell 318, and you can see how close it is, 317 for everybody else. Oscar Piastri 315. Maybe he's running a little bit more wing than Lando Norris. So let's delve now even further into that Sector 3 difference and seeing what they were all doing precisely through that change of direction between 7 and 8. We've got the microsector results, and you can see there, this is exactly the same piece of road on their quickest laps. Max Verstappen, 264 kilometers an hour in 7th gear. He's already gone from 6th to 7th. I know there are differences in ratios, but let's give this out the benefit of the doubt, because for sure Max is getting the car into a higher gear just to settle it, just so he can get that change of direction absolutely perfect, whereas everybody else is still there in 6th gear. Lewis Hamilton, second quickest right there. That says a lot about Lewis. That should give him a lot of confidence, because where it really counts, where it's really down to subtle weight changes, Lewis still absolutely, well, right up in the Max Verstappen class, bearing in mind obviously the Red Bull is a more agile car on that bit of road than the Mercedes, as George Russell is showing. Lewis 259 still in 6th gear, everybody else in 6th gear. Carlos Sainz, pretty good job as well, 258, but probably playing the penalty. He's very quick there, but he does make a lot of weight change from right to left. He does lean on the car a lot, and possibly that was then penalising him on the straight afterwards. But in terms of mid-corner, he's really good there. Oscar Piastri 256, Lando Norris 255. Bearing out everything we say about Oscar Piastri, he does have great feel for that change of direction. And George Russell 254, much more spiky through there than Lewis Hamilton. Lewis is doing everything in a slightly more softer, supple way. George is dum-dum like that. And that shows up. That's whatever that is. That's 5 kilometers an hour difference right there. Very impressive performance by Lewis Hamilton. So you shouldn't be too down about being slower on the overall lap compared with George, because right there, that's a very good piece of news for Lewis Hamilton. But the best piece of news, of course, is for Max Verstappen and how good he is there and how different he is from everybody else, and how, okay, the Red Bull is a great car, but he's absolutely extracting the maximum from it, to the point where he's in 7th gear where everybody else is still in 6th. So that's really impressive. And I think that says just about everything you need to say about qualifying today in Austria. On a circuit this small, on a circuit lap this small, for Max to have that sort of advantage and to hold that advantage throughout the sprint race and then throughout qualifying, even though he's on scrub tyres in Q1. Really, really impressive day for Max Verstappen. And so that's how they line up on the grid, assuming Max makes a clean start, and he's done quite a lot of those in recent times. It's going to be another Max Verstappen demonstration. I won't say walkover tomorrow, because it's a demonstration of finesse and of how good he is, even on a circuit which in theory should bring the opposition nearer to Max, because there are 3 DRS zones and it is a very short lap, and there aren't many corners, but there's that one place, and also the approach to turn 1 where he can really do something differently from anybody else. Of course, DRS is another story, and we saw that coming into play in the sprint race today. Max made a really good start and was pulling out a substantial lead over Lando even by the end of the first lap. Really good. But as soon as DRS was activated, Lando was able to get in the tow, and he actually got past Max going into turn 3, which is the tight right-hander at the top there. Got a run on him with DRS and came in from quite deep, and Max sort of was just about to turn in and then straighten the wheel. Lando got him up the inside, and then classic Max Verstappen just wouldn't let the momentum get away from him, stayed in the tow, right behind Lando. He didn't have DRS because he'd been leading the race at that point. And just when Lando was least expecting it, in the middle of the road, probably should have been a bit more to the right, Max just came down the inside from nowhere, really. I don't think Lando was expecting him at all to be there on the inside. He locked the inside front, and Max just did a perfect pass. And Oscar Piastri was then all over Lando and managed to get past Lando as well. And Lando then spent the rest of the race, he said he wasn't feeling that well, but the way he drove today looked like the normal Lando Norris to me. So it was just sort of classic Lando before the sprint race. Not feeling very well. A bit of a Nigel Mansell in that respect, isn't he? Anyway, Oscar drove very well, and Lando, in the end, he sat around for most of the race, getting the tyres to work again. Got near enough to Oscar probably to start playing with DRS, but didn't do anything, and they finished 2nd and 3rd in that order, but Max just won that race going away. Superb win for Max Verstappen. Very good race too by Carlos Sainz. First lap, fabulous pass around the outside of George Russell going into turn 4. Not many drivers can pull off an outside pass on George Russell, and he did it. Obviously, that would have annoyed George intensely, and he did get back in the end with a DRS pass over Carlos. Very good pass it was too, but bearing in mind this was the first lap with fuel in the car, the amount of fuel they were running anyway. Great pass by Carlos, I thought. Lewis Hamilton tried to get near Carlos but couldn't and finished 6th. Charles Leclerc a distant 7th. Very disappointing. He made, with the team, they went for further chassis changes, setup changes going into qualifying, and just ended up with quite a different car from Carlos Sainz. Nothing spectacularly new in that. We see teams doing that a lot, but Charles talking about that a lot after qualifying, when in reality it would have been better to have gone into detail about why and what happened going into the second last corner. He just went in much too quickly, lost the back end, and not enough room for correction. Good job for him. There's a big runoff area there, and he was able to bring the car back, did a 1:10 or something on that lap. But we haven't seen many incidents there. Got to say, hats off to the FIA and the circuit architects and designers and engineers who have put in new curbs this year in the Österreichring. They're working really well. We've got curb and then we've got gravel, but there doesn't seem to be much gravel going onto the circuit, and it's all working well in terms of track limits. Oscar Piastri accepted, of course. My only thought is that the reason we were always told prior to this year that they weren't able to do curbs like that at the Österreichring was because the circuit has a dual purpose with MotoGP, and they don't want any sort of gravel on for MotoGP for obvious reasons. So I'm just wondering if that means no more MotoGP in the Österreichring, or massive changes, and expensive changes, of course, for MotoGP. Anyway, I suppose Formula One says, well, that's not our problem. If you want us to have a race there, you're going to have to make these changes. And just to sum up, they are working very well. So that was good. Sergio Perez, they went round and round, finished 8th. Very unimpressive, really, in the other Red Bull. Kevin Magnussen, 9th. Got a penalty for locking up when he was behind Fernando, and Fernando had to run wide to avoid him. But I mean, it was all for, I don't know, what was it, for 9th, 10th place or something, nothing particularly important. He got a penalty, still finished 9th on the road, which is good. Lance Stroll, 10th in the other Aston Martin. Qualifying for me was all about that really sensational piece of road, turn 7 to turn 8, and what Max Verstappen is doing there. You can see it on TV. You can see, I mean, they move the camera a lot, so it's quite difficult. But if they try and, if you can catch laps where they don't move the camera too much, you can just see Max, he comes out of 7, and bearing in mind he's actually going quicker than anybody else at this point, looks as if he's almost on rails, gets the car to the point where he's got to change direction and just does it beautifully. And you can see him coming out on a slightly earlier exit than most drivers. If you see Lando there, if you see Carlos Sainz there, even Charles Leclerc, there's a lot of that, and then there's a lot of that. But there's none of that with Max Verstappen, and there's not much of that with Lewis Hamilton either, and that shows up in the data we've been talking about today. So yeah, great bit of road. I'm not sure how big a factor, that won't play that big factor in the race tomorrow, because there'll be full tanks, there'll be DRS, and millions of other variables will come into play. But that was what defined the quality of the lap of Max Verstappen today around this funny little circuit, the Red Bull Ring, designed for close racing and for competitive overtaking. But suddenly there emerges, blossoms, this beautiful little technical part of the lap, which was wonderful to watch today, I thought. So yeah, really good qualifying session in that sense, really enjoyed it. And it'll be inevitably an incident-filled race, I'm sure. DRS alone will do that, plus safety cars potentially, and lots of other stuff going on. So look forward to tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, our partners. Make sure you read about them in the description below this video. Take care. See you tomorrow.